Welcome everyone to Wrestling with Our Faith podcast. I am your host Chris and your co-host Josh. How you going, Josh?
I am doing pretty good, man. It's snowing.
It is
Finally.
it is snowing, but it's supposed to be in the 50s Thursday and Friday. So
I wish Michigan would just pick one or the other.
I know it was nice over the weekend, and now it's snowing, and we'll be back to snow and cold probably shortly after. It is that time of year.
Christmas weather.
Yeah, I'm not looking forward to the snow.
Not yet.
No, I'm just before I didn't care. I'm getting to the point in life where probably I'm just getting old. I just have that, hey, it's time to go south for the winter.
Get a vacation home in Florida or
Yeah, I don't know. I just don't enjoy it as much. I guess it's more of the snow. Like the cold, I don't mind. It's just I'm done driving in snow. I mean, I did it for years when I delivered my paper route, and it was just terrible. So I guess I've had my fill of driving in bad weather more than most people, and I'm just done with it.
I'm kind of the opposite. If it's going to be cold, there better be snow on the ground.
Yeah,
I
well,
hate just sitting in the cold and everything's gloom and dark and
like I don't mind snow on the ground, just not on the roads. I don't want to drive in it.
that's fair.
So yeah, just want to welcome everyone. Just want to encourage everyone that we want to hear from you. We did not hear from you last week. We encouraged you uh, to reach out to us to let us know how we're doing, and we didn't hear from you. So I want to again encourage you guys to leave a comment for us on our YouTube channel. Give us a like, give us a follow, and when we hit 50 subscribers, if you have done those three things, we will be giving out a $50 gift card to Amazon.
Ooh.
Yes, I've picked it to Amazon.
Good choice.
So yes, we will give that out, $50 gift card to Amazon once we hit 50 subscribers, to everyone who has followed us, given us a like, and commented on one of our videos. We want to hear from you guys and what you guys think. And we had one friend who decided he wanted to tell us what he thought, but apparently he was a bit too shy to put his comment on YouTube. So I guess he's not going to be
no Amazon for him.
Exactly. I mean, tough luck for him. I mean, I think we should just cut him out right away just for trying to skirt the process there. So, like I said, we want you to do that. I mean, we're here for you guys, and we need, we want to know what you guys think. Is there a way we can improve, or do you like the topics that we're talking about? Are they resonating with you guys? And just like I said, we just want to know what you guys are thinking.
Do you think we should cut our hair? I mean, we're not going to agree with you, but if you say it, at least you said something.
That is true. That is true. Also, anyone who wants to join us during our podcast as we're recording, you can do so at on Tuesdays, sometime between 6 and 6:30 is when we start. You can join us on Twitch, and you can join us in the chat there, and we'll be keeping an eye on stuff like that. So if you have a comment or a question about something that we're talking about, we will keep an eye on that, and we will try to raise those questions so everyone can, so you guys can participate in this discussion with us. I say we have a couple people. Yep, none of those are just Josh's friends talking to him. But hey, at least there's some activity there. So, yeah. So again, join us on Twitch and join in on the conversation as we have it, and make sure you leave us messages on our YouTube and all social media for that matter. Let us know that you guys are listening, what you guys think, and we can't wait to hear for that. So this week we are going to talk about an interesting topic. As I was preparing for this topic, I found one side of the topic very easy to prepare for, and the other side of the topic a little more challenging to prepare for. And it wouldn't be in the way that you would think. Um, so what we're going to talk about today is the Bible real?
Mm.
Which you wouldn't think as somebody, if they're a believer, why they would even wrestle with something like this. But I think it's something that we need to, even if we're not necessarily wrestling with it, we should have some type of information that we can go to if somebody ever questions us. If they're wrestling with it, then there's ways that we can provide them some information on uh, why we believe that it's real. And then we can also understand some of the stuff and why people say that it's not real. So we are prepared. I always firmly believe that if you're going to engage in a discussion with someone, it's always better to know their point of view better than they do, because if you know their point of view better than they do and how they're going to bring it at you, you're always going to be able to know how to what to say, how to answer those questions and that type of stuff. So it's always important to know both sides of an argument. So the first part we want to talk about is why people don't believe that the Bible is real. And is there something specific that you want to bring up first before I get into my points here, that things that you've heard that people said why they don't believe the Bible's real?
Well, usually it's just that there's no evidence for a God
Mm-hmm.
to exist.
Mm-hmm.
There's no proof. It has to be tangible, something that we can analyze, calculate. It's kind of hard.
Yeah, and it kind of leads into my the first point that I had that I found, and I found similar type quotes from people, and just the way that this person had written it out, I thought it was a good talking point that we can kind of um, walk through some of this and hash some of this out. And this person said that no one has to provide any reason why the Bible is false. It says, like all extraordinary claims, it starts out false until someone provides evidence that it's true. As no one has, there is no evidence that the Bible is anything more than a collection of myths and fables with a smattering of heavenly biased history, law, poetry, and prophecy. A lot of the places and some of the events and people mentioned in the Bible did exist, but that does not make the Bible overall true, any more than mentioning London makes Harry Potter series true. What do you think about that?
Well, I think that's. I think you can't really compare those two. Harry Potter is literally made for fiction,
True, right.
where not only are the people and the places real in the Bible
Mm-hmm.
that are mentioned, but you can actually track it through the Middle East, where the
Mm-hmm.
story is located at. There's never a point where you don't know where things are happening, as far as the Old Testament goes.
Right. Uh, one of the things that the first struck me on this is his very first sentence, that no one has to provide any reason why the Bible is false. And to me, I don't necessarily agree with that. I think there are parts that that just doesn't sit well, because I don't see that playing out in all aspects of life. And I guess one example that I would have is just because something necessarily hasn't been proved beyond a shadow of a doubt that it's real, doesn't mean that it's not real.
Right.
We'll take gravity, for example. It's not that gravity didn't exist before Isaac Newton came along and gets hit in the head with the apple and was like, "Hey, gravity," something like that, But it didn't mean that gravity didn't exist. It had always been there, and whether we understood it or not, and I think some of this where it's proof is we don't understand necessarily everything that's going on biblically.
Right.
There's a lot of things going on there that I don't know if humanity is ever going to be able to unpack fully, because we're talking about an infinite God who operates on a level that the human mind just can't comprehend. And so I don't know if it's ever going to be able to be proven necessarily 100% true. We obviously can't get in a time machine and just jump back in time and say that it's true, and with all of history for that matter. Um, there's no point in, especially ancient history, that we can say definitively we know exactly what happened.
Hmm.
I mean, there are people and places that we know for a fact are true, but beyond that, we don't know much about the antiquity era. So we can't say all of the stuff that we know about antiquity that people take as fact. Um, we can apply that biblically as well.
Hmm.
So um, we do know that certain things, but we can't just qualify it as a whole and say, well, because you can't prove everything, then none of it can be real.
Right. Um, to the point where it's um, you have to, well, you don't have to prove that it's false. You have to prove that it's true in order for something to exist.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so many theories on how uh, the Earth was created, other theories throughout the world that we just accept as hard fact. Um, there are a lot of inconsistencies that I think we've slightly talked about. One that I feel like we have to mention: matter cannot be created nor destroyed.
Mm-hmm.
And if everything started from nothing, that's by logic standards is impossible. So then you have to take everything out of the realm of logic and come to an illogical conclusion.
Mm-hmm.
I think it takes about as much faith to believe that God doesn't exist as it does to believe that God does exist.
I agree. Yes, because I don't think you can prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that God does exist, and I don't think you can prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that He doesn't exist.
Mm-hmm.
I think I said that correctly. Um, so I mean, and that's where faith does come in. There is an aspect of believing if the Bible is true. There's an aspect of faith in that, and we're if we could prove something beyond a shadow of a doubt when it comes to religion, then we take the faith aspect out of it, and there has to be a faith aspect to our belief
Mm-hmm.
that we are willing to trust a God that we believe in, but not everything necessarily adds up. Not necessarily because it's illogical or anything, but again, God operates on a level that the humanity can never and will never fully understand.
I think what else, an argument that could be made that I've heard, um, is that the victor is the one who tells the story.
Right.
So in Noah and the Ark, um, in that ideal, everyone on the planet is wiped out except for Noah and his family. They get it on an ark.
Mm-hmm.
The victor tells the story. They get to write down their view on what happened, usually in that turn making themselves the protagonist, the hero.
Mm-hmm.
And so, if we believe that that is true, then a lot of the Bible, some would say, is slighted towards a certain angle.
Right. And I think maybe even a better example would be when the Israelites left Egypt and crossed the Red Sea.
Mm-hmm.
And people will say, well, there's no account of it in Egyptian history. Well, who's going to put an account in your army that's being decimated by a group of people who didn't have an army?
You were literally destroyed by slaves.
Right. And so who's going to put that in their history? History is always about victories, the positive things.
Mm-hmm.
It's very rare that you'll see a civilization's history where they talk about the defeats that they had, the low points that they had.
Right.
We just don't see that. We see that a bit more in modern history now, because it's a different era where we have more information at our fingertips now, obviously. So people can't hide certain things like that.
Well, yeah.
Where they didn't have that back then. And the globe was really extremely spread out back then as well.
Mm-hmm.
So stuff that it's not going to travel by word of mouth as much, and so if you just don't record it, then it never happened. in their
Right.
minds. You get a couple generations deep in your own history, and your own people aren't even going to know that that happened anymore.
Right.
They're just going to, because no one's going to talk about it. There's no written down record of it happening. So you get 3 generations later, and to them it never happened.
Hmm. Um. So with Egypt, specifically the Exodus, where the Israelites left Egypt, through old writings, and it's not like a hardcore proven fact, but there is talk about there's this blotch on Egyptian history. There's just something that's not talked about.
Hmm.
Um, for a huge people group, for a huge people like the Israelites to exist at that time and not be recognized by a world power
Hmm.
is is ridiculous.
Right.
So, victors or the losers.
Right. I think another thing is, when you look at, he talked about it's just a collection of myths and fables, and uh, but a lot of these myths and fables, especially when you're talking about Old Testament stuff and stuff pre Abraham, uh, they're things that every civilization back then had a similar account of.
Hmm.
Every civilization had a creation account. Every civilization had a flood account, um, and those types of things. So, if all these civilizations had those, especially when you look at a flood account, that's a pretty crazy thing that every civilization back then had their own account of a flood. Like, why would they have that if there wasn't some sense of truth to it?
And you're talking like 20 or more generations, um, thousands of years
Hmm.
of a certain story or history. And yes, it's likely and possible that these stories have been altered from their original transcript, but um, you have to take into account that like on the opposite side of the world, there are people with the same exact story with details that are slightly flipped.
Right. So again, like, if the entire ancient world has a similar story, there has to be some mode of truth to it.
Yes.
Does that necessarily prove the Bible exists? No, but it's one piece that it gives to the puzzle
Yeah.
that gives it a little more credibility.
It
Um,
definitely doesn't prove that God doesn't exist.
right, and it doesn't prove that the Bible's false either.
Hmm.
Just because something seems too crazy to happen doesn't mean that it didn't happen.
Hmm.
Um, we see those types of things all the time. You hear stories about. I was just watching a movie. I forget what it was, but they were talking about the story. I forget when it happened, maybe 5, 10 years, something like that. But there was 3 kids. They were playing out on the ice, and the ice broke. They fell through, and the one was pronounced dead for an hour and 8 minutes, and then was able to be revived and lives a normal life. There's nothing wrong. He has no, slowing down of his brain functions or stuff you would think of would
I was about to
happen
say,
if you are legally dead for an hour and 8 minutes.
lack of oxygen after 4 minutes starts deterioration of the brain.
Exactly. So you're talking an hour and 8 minutes, but then come out of that with nothing wrong.
Yeah.
Like, just something that's not natural. That's unexplainable. Does that mean it didn't happen?
Yeah. Just to clarify, this is based off of a true story.
Yeah, it was. Yes, there was
Okay,
a movie made about it. I can't think of the movie name.
we'll find it.
Um, but yeah, and it was a story about a mother of faith who, she got to the hospital and her son was pronounced dead, and she prayed over him, and just his heart started beating again, and
Hmm.
um, got shipped off. And even then, the doctor said there's probably a 99% chance he's going to die,
Yeah.
and he didn't, and he came out of it unscathed. So because that can't be explained, because that is, I mean, if that same thing happened 2,000, 3,000 years ago and is written down, wouldn't we call that a myth today?
Probably, yeah.
Because it doesn't make any sense and we can't explain it.
Right.
So it couldn't happen. So again, just because something happened that seems out of the ordinary, it doesn't prove that something did happen, but it doesn't prove that it didn't happen either.
Right.
So I think that just debunks some of this when people try to use it and say, well, unless you can prove something, then it didn't happen.
Hmm.
Well, that's not true, because in 100 years, we're not going to be able to prove why probably this happened to this kid, but it still happened.
Hmm.
Like we've been around to be not eyewitness accounts, but secondhand accounts of this event from people who were eyewitness accounts.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of that goes on in the Bible. People who are eyewitness accounts who are writing this down, or secondary accounts to these writings about what was going on. So um, it gives some more weight to what's being written. And the last point that this guy makes is um, that just because some things are corroborated doesn't mean that they're true. And again, I disagree with that.
The flood story. I
Or
mean,
just
it's not some things; it's several civilizations.
right. And I think that, yes, I think a lot of people, they want that undeniable proof.
Hmm.
Like I don't know what would even give them that undeniable proof too,
I mean,
outside of jumping in a time machine and going back to that time and witnessing it with their own eyes. I think people who don't want to believe that the Bible is real, it's going to take a supernatural act of God on their life to get them to open their eyes to see certain
I
things.
was about to say, I don't think there's anything that you and I can do to prove to these people that.
And
Yeah.
exactly, we're not going to be able to. There's no argument we can make that's going to be able to prove, especially somebody who's dead set against um, taking any of that to heart.
Well, yeah. So if this guy is saying that you have to prove to me that it existed, you uh, you can't prove to me that it's false. Which, I mean, you literally leave out half of the argument. You kind of need both.
Right. I remember there's a person who I went to high school with, and they had posted some article on Facebook, and I can't remember exactly what it was, but they were trying to use religion and twist it in a way that I didn't believe was true and true to what God's word said. And I just said that I disagree with this for certain reasons, and I can go into those reasons a lot more. It's going to be a lot of extensive. I mean, it'd be like writing a term paper to be able to fully go into the reasoning behind it and why I believe this was wrong. And I said, hey, I'm willing to do that to explain this stuff on a more deeper level on why I believe this is misguided. And the person was just like, well, you can do that, but I'm not going to listen. And I'm just like, well, okay, well, that solves it. Like, to be able to hear and understand something, you have to be open to the idea. And if you're not open to an idea of hearing, then it doesn't matter what somebody says or what proof they even
Well, the
say.
question then is, what is stopping people from attempting to look into or
Mm-hmm.
attempt to listen to? And I've heard this several times. Uh, to believe in our God specifically,
Mm-hmm.
he claims, well, it's claimed that there is a heaven and a hell. Um, and there's a certain lifestyle, a certain amount of sacrifice that is um, supposed to be given in the lifestyle that we have chosen.
Mm-hmm.
And to say that there is a God means that there is sin, that there is evil in the world. And if I have to acknowledge that, then I have to contend with the fact that I am either living a sinful life and I need to correct it, um, or continue sinning and possibly be damned to hell.
Right.
It's it's easier to say, well, it's not real. If you can't prove this, then it's over. Um, and like I said, there's nothing that you and I can do to prove to somebody that God exists.
Mhm.
But I really haven't been able to see anything where people can prove to me that God doesn't exist.
Right. And I think if you're going to take a stance one way or another, um, you have to have some burden of proof.
Hmm.
You can't say on one side that I believe God exists, but offer no proof to that, and you can't say on the other side and say I don't believe God exists, but offer no evidence to it,
Right.
because it's still you're still taking both are beliefs,
Hmm.
which means both needs to have some type of a proof set as to why you believe that. And if you can't offer that and say, well, I don't believe it, but it's your job or the other side's job to prove to me that it does, or from believer standpoint saying that it's people who don't believe it's their job to prove why it doesn't, like, that
And
doesn't make sense.
why would I even want to put in the effort if the person that I'm talking to won't listen to me, doesn't want to hear what I have to say in the first place?
Hmm.
Um, and I think I've seen that more than anything.
Hmm.
When people say, "Okay, prove the Bible to me," or "Prove to me that God exists," it's like, well, whatever I say, even if it is a valid or good argument, odds are you already have something formed in your head, and you're not going to listen to what I have to say.
Right.
And I think that's where um, a lot of Christians will say, "Well, then you have to live by example, show that your faith is uh, astoundingly changed by God."
Hmm.
And back to the damned to hell
Hmm.
thing, um, that is a very tough thing to accept, but that's not the point of Christianity. Like, there's an aspect to not following God, but like you're not supposed to be a Christian because you're fearful of hell.
Right.
It's not it's not okay. Now I'm a Christian, so that I have this free pass to get away from this eternal suffering.
Hmm.
It's it's not like that.
Right.
It's not the point of Christianity.
Hmm.
It's to reestablish a connection with God. Um,
Yeah, it's a relational
yes,
thing. It's about building a relationship with God. It's not about, you know filling off your checklist, and you do the right things, you say the right things, then you're good to go. It's that relationship. You can do all the right things and still not go to heaven because you never had a relationship with God,
right.
and that's what God is looking for, that relationship. So, yeah. um, One of the other major points that I had seen was that people always say that the Bible contradicts itself. And I mean, what were your initial thoughts about that?
Well, so there, to an extent, you have to look at who wrote it, and for most of the Bible, we can't really specify a certain person or group that said, okay, they wrote this. We know that it's old. We know that it's ancient, and we know that it's been around for several years.
Hmm.
But you have to kind of look at the evidence for it. So, for example, um, in a class that I'm taking right now, we're talking about Genesis,
Hmm.
and one of the things that you have to look at, and everything is super detailed. If you don't look at the details, it's not going to make sense to you,
Hmm.
and so therefore it's easy to say, well, it's not real.
Right.
For example, when we're talking about Noah getting off of the ark,
Hmm.
he initially makes an altar to the Lord
Right.
and sacrifices.
Hmm.
Um, that's only mentioned once. And there's two narratives. There's this idea that there's a redactor who took two Jewish traditions
Hmm.
of the same story, the same flood story, and put them together. So that's why when you look at the Old Testament, there's a lot of things that are repeated twice.
Right.
Is because there are two Jewish accounts of what
Mm.
happened. The problem is one sect, the priestly narrative, focuses on God's divine uh, rule, and it's distant. He's all powerful, omnipotent. He's something that we cannot even we can't even look at, go to. There's this huge separation, and this God knows everything that there is to know.
Mhm.
And then there's the J narrative. I think it's Jehovahist, maybe. I'll have to come
Mhm.
back to that. But to them, God is relational. He's with us.
Mhm.
He's able to have human characteristics. So in this sacrifice in the Old Testament, it talks about how uh, the sacrifice was made and the aroma was pleasing to God.
Mhm.
The priestly narrative does not have a sacrifice in there
Mhm.
because, being the priestly narrative, only the descendants of Aaron can offer sacrifices. So it's impossible for them to think of that Noah could have a sacrifice
Mm.
because only Aaron, the line of Aaron, can have a sacrifice years in advance.
Right.
Where the J narrative is like, okay, God found something that the human is doing is pleasing,
Mm.
thus the rainbow. But it's an inconsistency that you would not know if you did not look into or research it. And it's there are several things like that.
Yeah, I know. I had found a website, and like I say, this topic and why the Bible is false. There is so much information that I could have spent weeks in preparation. There's one website I found, it literally was a commentary of the entire Bible, giving the commentary on inaccuracies that they felt were, things that they thought were inaccurate or that type of stuff. I'm like, that is a lot of time and effort that somebody put in to something they don't believe, for one.
Yeah.
Um, and I think it was a lot of it is just misguided because even though they put time and effort into it, they didn't put proper time and effort into it. And I'll just use one of the examples is he was talking about the genealogy of Jesus. And there's two different places where that's located in Matthew chapter 1, verses 1 through 16, and then in Luke chapter 3, verses 23 through 38. And on the surface, both of these genealogies are different. The first one in Matthew is it starts back at Adam and it works its way uh, all the way through Jesus, and it goes through David and through David's son of Solomon,
Hmm.
and it was and I want to say the way that one was written. Well, I'll get in that in a second. And then the second genealogy, the one in Luke, starts with Jesus and works his way back to David, but that one goes through David, son of Nathan. And but on the surface, these look like very contradictory genealogies.
Hmm.
How can Jesus' line go back to David through Solomon in one and go back to David through Nathan in the other? So, like I say, on the surface, you look at it and say, well, this obviously has to be a contradiction. It doesn't make sense. So this obviously is just a two different writers in the Old Testament or in the New Testament who just weren't on the same page when they wrote this, and so this has to be false. But when you look deeper into these genealogies, there's differences, and you have to look at the entire picture of Scripture, not just the surface.
Hmm.
And Christians get into this type of thing the other way, where they look at it on a surface level and they take things out of context to make it say what they want to say.
Right.
And I think a lot of times people look at who are trying to disprove the Bible do the same thing. They look at it on the surface and try to make it say what it doesn't say to prove their point that things are
Yeah.
wrong. So when you look at these two genealogies, uh, the first one in Matthew, you got to understand who Matthew is writing to, and Matthew is writing to Jews. So uh, he lists this genealogy as um, and he starts out the book like with this. So he's going back all the way from Adam and saying Adam, whose son was, whose son was, whose son was, and goes all the way through Jesus.
Hmm.
And there's an evangelist, Dr. Stephen Manley, who's gone through this extensively. If you ever want to go into that genealogy, he's done a phenomenal job, and I could never even do it justice to begin to explain it anywhere near the way he does. But so it does that, and That is a line that goes through the sons through Joseph, who was the husband. As it ends, it says to Joseph, who is the husband of Mary, the mother of Jesus.
Mhm.
Well, then you get into Luke's account, and it's written differently. Um, so, and it's the only place where a genealogy is written like this, because it's just not done like this. Normally, it would go Jesus, the son of Joseph, the son of the son of the son
Mhm.
of, but that's not how it's written. It's written as Jesus, the son of Joseph, and this person, and this person, and this person, and this person. Because we see throughout the New Testament, Jesus is referred to the son of David, he's referred to as the son of Adam, obviously the son of God. Um, so this genealogy is more of he is a son in the line of these people. Some other scholars believe that this is Mary's lineage. So he's a son in the line of that lineage,
Mhm.
and that's more of what it's talking about. Is he's a son of in this line. It's not a direct um, thing, and not all of those people may have been potentially related. That it's he is the son of you know God's chosen, he's the son of God through God's chosen people. He represents all of humanity as a son, and so it's when you really have to get into, and I've probably done a poor job of explaining it, but it's a really deep concept, and I wish I had more time to piece it together before we were able to come on. Um, but if you don't look at Scripture in its entirety, because again, Luke is writing to a completely different set of people. He's writing to Greeks who are Gentiles. They're not looking, you're not going to talk to people in the same manner. Like, I'm not going to try to explain something to an adult the same way I'm going to explain it to a child.
Well, yeah, there are a lot of variables that you have to take into account.
Right. So, who you're speaking to is highly important in understanding why things were written the way that they were written.
Well, yeah, you have the placement. So where this was written, why this was written, who it was written to. There are so many little things that we don't take into account. We just read it at face value.
Mm-hmm.
It's like there are so many variables that have to be taken into account. Otherwise, we're clueless to put it in some kind of order. Something that I feel like um, should be said about this. When you were online looking for information,
Mm-hmm.
my grandfather used to say, "Believe none of what you hear and half of what you see." Um,
Mm-hmm.
and I've held that value to be true. And before I act or say or do something, I will try my best to do my own research or look into it.
Mm-hmm.
But a lot of the things that you're looking for, it's from a time and a tradition that uh, is nowhere near close to ours. So it's important to do your own research and look at both sides.
Right.
If something doesn't seem right, find the other argument. Look through there.
Mm-hmm.
You're gonna find something.
Right. And um, like people have talked about, even in the Gospels, how all four Gospels are different.
Mhm.
Matthew, Mark, and Luke are more similar to each other, and John is kind of an outlier from all of them. But they're all different. Um, so people look to that and be like, well, if you have four people writing about the same person, why are they so different?
Mm.
And again, you have to understand who they're being written to, because who you're writing to is going to change uh, how you're going to write things to get across
It's
the point
audience centered.
that you're trying to make.
Yeah.
And two, you're either dealing with firsthand eyewitnesses in John and potentially Mark, and secondary eyewitnesses, or
Mhm.
first Matthew's would be first eyewitness too, or secondary eyewitness accounts, like Luke, who who heard it through other believers.
Right.
And take any, I mean, let's just say you have a car crash and you have 4 witnesses to the car crash. None of those 4 eyewitness accounts are going to be exactly the same.
But they all have one thing in common, and that is that the car crashed,
Right.
which is what's in the Bible. There
It-
are so many things that are so similar and so close to the same. It's impossible to say that they're all lying because they're all consistent.
Right. Whether one person says that there were 2 people in this scene and another person says that there were 3 people in the scene, but how many people were there, whether it's 2 or 3, is irrelevant to the point that's being made.
The scene is still happening.
The scene is still happening.
Yeah.
So I think that's another thing that you have to keep in mind. Like, that are there going to be discrepancies like that in the Bible? Yes, they're going to. They're written by men.
We find them in history textbooks today.
And I just want to go into this one thing I was going to have for later, but it makes sense here now. That of the ancient texts of the New Testament that they have found, there's like 5,800 of them. They are 99.5% accurate to each other. Compared to, I believe this site said that of other works from antiquity, Homer's The Iliad, which is the second most copies that we have from them, which is around 1,750.
Yeah.
And that's only 95% accurate. And that's the second, I think, most accurate of things we have from antiquity that we have a firm amount of. So it's almost 5%. It's almost 100% accurate, but it doesn't mean, like, even in writing, like, there's always going to be those small discrepancies, but it's always going to be the message is going to be the same. That's always going to be there, because you have people who believe that the Bible is completely inerrant, which means that there isn't a single error in it at all. And it's that's a fundamentalist type of view, where they believe that the Bible is completely inerrant, that there's not a single mistake. So there's a specific reason why it says 2 people in this gospel and 3 people in this gospel, and that's not a mistake, or it's not even a difference between 2 different eyewitness accounts. That's 100. They're both 100% accurate. And again, like, it's where I think fundamentalists run into issues when you say certain things. Like, 'cause I think they paint themselves into a corner, because there are discrepancies. No discrepancy that goes against the overall message and theme of what the Bible is trying to get across. So the message of salvation is never changing throughout. God's character is never changing throughout. Jesus is never changing throughout. Those types of things, like, those never change. But the small stuff, because again, it's written by man. Man is fallible. So it's those. So that's why I say it's inerrant when it comes to salvation. It's inerrant when it comes to who God is.
Yeah.
It's inerrant when it comes to who Jesus is. Those are the things where it's inerrant. Some of the minor details, you can't say that those are inerrant, but that's okay. Like, it's not that big of a deal, because again, you're talking about such minor details that have nothing to do with what's trying to be conveyed. Like, if you have, like, say you have a car crash and one person says, well, there's 2 people walking down the sidewalk, and another person says, well, there's 3 people walking down the sidewalk. Well, the people walking down the sidewalk has nothing to do with the car crash.
Right.
So
I feel like we've been arguing for why people say it is real to an extent, but I think we could probably move on to that.
yeah. So I'll let you start. Do you have anything?
Yeah. I think in order to say that the Bible is real, there uh, historical context. There's certain things or certain people that have to be acknowledged as real
Hmm.
in order for us to accept the Bible as it is.
Right.
So, like, there has to be a shred of evidence. Um, for instance, that Jesus was a real person, was alive,
Hmm.
was there.
Right.
Whether he was crucified, rose again, and then ascended. Historically, that you could debate that, but as long as you have that Jesus was a real person, then uh, it's pretty easy to move on from there.
Right. And there is some evidence. Whoa, my chair is just falling down on me. There is evidence of that. Hang on one second. We'll just have to play my chairs up. I think it may have broke. So anyway, the fun stuff. But yeah, there is some historical evidence of that, um, where we see different historians, like Jewish historian Josephus, who talks about uh, things that were written in the Bible as historically these things existed.
Mhm.
Jesus was a real person. Pontius Pilate was a real person. Um, so he talked about John the Baptist. Um, he he talked about the Herods, the Sadducees, the Pharisees, high priests, Ananias, Caiaphas, the different Roman empires. Like he brings in biblical characters that we see as like John the Baptist, Jesus, and lumps them into the same historical people that non-believers would say existed.
Mhm.
He also says, well, as it's all one group and you can't differentiate between the two, as in, yes, these people existed, and so did these people.
Mhm.
Like these were historical figures,
Yeah.
and we're talking about somebody who was born near 40 AD, and so he's living in a life in the first generation after was dead. So he wasn't an eyewitness necessarily account, but he's writing about it, saying like this is what's happened.
Mhm.
It'd be like one of us writing about, say, John F. Kennedy.
Right.
We weren't around when he was alive, but we can write about him with pretty good historical accuracy of that he was, a real person and that type of stuff. So this
Right.
is the type of person Josephus is, and he's writing about this stuff as this is literally this is these people were real, and this is what they did in the time period.
Well, fun fact, just to throw out there that I didn't know, but I was talking to a friend. Um, he's a Muslim, and we were
Hmm.
just talking about our faith and our faiths, discussing similarities, discussing differences, and I didn't know this, but Jesus is a Messiah in the Quran.
Yeah,
He is
he's
a
considered one of the major prophets.
correct.
Yeah.
The differences between us, um, uh, between Christianity and Islam, as far as our view of Jesus, is that he never died, was never crucified, but he did ascend into heaven. He's the undying. Oh, if I get this right, I think it was the undying Messiah,
Hmm.
um, actual person in another faith tradition that doesn't that's not ours, which is
Right.
interesting. That I mean, for us, he's the center
Hmm.
of what we stand for and what we do, but for them, um, it's Muhammad.
Right. And even in the Jewish tradition, uh, and I can't be 100% accurate on this, but I believe that they will say that Jesus was a real person too, but he just wasn't the Messiah.
A prophet. I've
They
heard
would just
prophet
say, yeah,
before.
or just a normal person. So even from a Jewish standpoint, they're saying that this was still a real person.
Hmm.
So then it just comes down to your belief, and do you believe that he was the Son of God? Did he die? Did he rise from the dead? And that. So
We have three major faith groups right there that estimates for probably more than, I'd say, 70 to 80% of the world's religions. acknowledging Jesus as an
Right.
existing person.
And two of those religions, they have no reason to even acknowledge that he existed. Like Judaism doesn't have a real reason to acknowledge that he existed. I mean, to even acknowledge that he existed gives some credibility that he could have been
Controversial.
the Messiah.
Yes.
I mean, if you want to completely just debunk that, you just never talk about him and erase him from your history,
Right.
because that's the easiest way to get rid of it. Is just saying that it didn't exist. But the fact that they still say that, well, he existed, but he was just a man, and even for Islam, like there really is no reason to say, and even in Islam, that Jesus existed. Again, it's almost counterproductive to their own religion. And again, hopefully I'm not misspeaking. I'm not fully versed in Islam to know exactly that, but from my personal perspective, it would seem counterproductive for them to admit that he was one of the major prophets, and I believe the last prophet that came before Muhammad. So he is, again, a much more stronger character in the Islamic faith than he is in the Judaistic faith. But all three have this major character that they acknowledge existed and was real. Again, it goes back to that. If the major religions, if the major societies, they had all these different stories that they all had, like the flood. If these major religions all have this central this key figure that they say was real, and he's really only critical in one of those faiths, then there has to be some evidence that backs that, that he was a real person.
Yeah.
So, and I think that from some of the stuff that I've been researching, there was kind of like four main areas that prove the Bible is real. The first one is we kind of talked about this a little bit, the literary evidence, and that the Bible is the most found manuscript in all of antiquity. Some of the major ones, like I mentioned Homer's Iliad had like 1,750 copies that they found. But like Aristotle, they have 49, but they don't, but they believe like everything that comes from Aristotle, like is more than they would say biblically, for that matter. Sophocles, they have 193. Plato, they have 210. Pliny, they have 200. These are just major philosophers that they had. So even if you add all, and there's a couple other ones on there, but if you add all 6 of those up, you're still not even scratching the surface of how many copies of the New Testament that they've found. And we're not even talking the Old Testament either. That's just the New Testament. So, and again, it's 99.5% accurate against each other.
Yeah.
So you have all these copies that are all very similar, almost identical, more than any other
ancient
document from antiquity. Like again, that to say then that this is completely, it can't be true. Why is there so many, more than any other? There has to be something to this. Then
there's a truth that exists.
Yeah. So I know the other ones that we'll get into talking a little more here is archaeological evidence, which some of this is pretty fascinating, and some of this goes into, you say that history is written by the victors, and so some of this actually shows history, from the loser's perspective, that was recorded. But one thing that they had found is, in the 1930s, they found the city of Jericho. And when they were excavating the city, they had discovered that the walls had fallen down around the city, just like the biblically it had said. Again, so you have a biblical account of a story that seems weird. Like, how would you just march around a city and the walls would just fall down?
Mhm.
Or just matter, why would the walls fall down at all? Even if, even if you say you just take God out of it, why would the walls ever just fall? And then you find the city and the walls have fallen.
Yeah.
Not destroyed, not like,
Broken apart.
broken apart. The walls just fell over.
Yeah.
Um, so again, that's a story that we have from the Bible that doesn't seem like it would be real, but now they found archaeological evidence to support that.
Um, uh, you may have this written down. I don't know. I'm gonna have to do more research, and we'll probably talk about it next week. Just as far as like what evidence it is, but I've heard a lot recently that they found evidence of chariots at the bottom of the Red Sea.
Um, so I don't necessarily want to get into that right now,
That's fair.
only because we have a topic coming up in a couple weeks where we're going to dive into that quite a bit more.
Fair enough.
So yeah, but because it's yes and no. So yeah,
We'll get there.
We'll get there and leave that one on hold, but we'll get back to that one in about a month or so.
Fair enough.
We'll get to that. But another one that I'd found is so when the Assyrians came down to take over Judea, they had surrounded the city. They had conquered a bunch of smaller cities along the way, and they were poised to take over Judea. And I can't remember. I think it was Isaiah, the prophet, basically said, "Don't worry, God's got this. The army's going to be defeated." And they found that 185,000 Syrian soldiers had died in the middle of the night, and they basically just limped away. And they found a city, and they had been doing some excavating there and found some cuneiform tablets that talked about this very battle.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it was missing the part that they had a whole bunch of soldiers die for no apparent reason, roughly in the middle of the night. But they had the whole account, to the point where in the biblical story they said that the Israeli king had offered to pay the Assyrian king to leave him alone, and that part's in the Assyrian account. It's basically the entire account is the same, minus, hey, we lost a whole bunch of soldiers.
Right.
Again, that goes back to history is always written by the winners. And if you're a loser, you're not going to put those parts in there that make you look bad. The Assyrian Empire was a big, powerful empire at that time, and you're not going to just let people know, hey, these smaller, inferior country we lost to.
Yeah.
So they're not going to have that type of stuff in there. Another thing is they found these called the Elba tablets, and they found these in 1964 by two professors from the University of Rome, and so in Genesis chapter 14, it talks about this a battle. There were these 4 or 5, these 5 kingdoms that were going to start a war against 4 other kingdoms, Sodom, Gomorrah, and they didn't believe, archaeologists didn't believe that these 5 cities were real. They thought that they just didn't exist. They were just made up. Well, they found these Elba tablets, and they listed all 5 of these cities. And these tablets were from even before Moses had, they say that he wrote Genesis. So there's evidence to these cities that were, again, way back in Genesis 14, which is not entirely further past creation,
Hmm.
um, and there's now proof that these cities existed, all five of them, um, actually in the same order that they were written at in biblically. So there's some more evidence there that, from an archaeological standpoint, that there are things talked about in the Bible that people didn't think existed, that they were just made up cities that were actually historically accurate cities, which are starting to give more and more proof to uh, the accuracy of the Bible as a whole.
Yeah.
Um, Not just parts that were real and parts that weren't. Now we're starting to find more and more things that were real that we never thought
Yeah.
were.
Since you brought up um, Moses writing Genesis, I feel like it's important that um, we do include other perspectives um, as to why things in the Bible don't make sense. Um, for one, Christians and Jews who believe in Genesis have struggled with the authorship of that. And like I said, we don't really know who wrote it, but tradition stands that Moses was the one who wrote it. God told him the history of the Jews while he was on the mountain. Um, Traditionally, that has been accepted. Um, and I've done some research in the library at my college, and most of the commentaries they were dating like 1920 to maybe even before were all saying that if you did not believe that Moses was the author of Genesis, then you were a heretic and you'll burn in hell just like the rest of the heretics that believe in what you believe in.
Mm-hmm.
Which there are very history is crazy because you find some very verbally aggressive Christians out there.
Mm-hmm.
But then through recent discoveries within the last 50 years, um, including I think the Dead Sea Scrolls coming out, that there's evidence, a lot of evidence to suggest that there were multiple authors who came together and, like I said, brought the different traditions, the priestly, the J narratives together. Um, all in all, for me to say that not all Christians agree on a single like narrative or a single perspective. Um, so like yes, there are stories that are very similar, and there's a lot of documents to go through those stories. But the reason why we have different denominations, Nazarene, Catholicism, the biggest one, uh, the reason why there are these differences is because there are things that we do not fundamentally agree on.
Mm-hmm.
Um, the problem with that is that it separates us from the single body of the church, which I feel like we're supposed to be a part of. Um, People argue that it's nice to have different denominations because um, it allows people to fit in the church that they believe with the most.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like to an extent, yeah, but they all have to be based off of Christianity from Israel, the
Mm-hmm.
original, like what it was supposed to be.
Yeah. Um, on the denomination thing, I have my own viewpoint on that, which isn't part of this conversation, and it's a much larger topic just to get into. But the authorship of Genesis is a very interesting topic, and I'm glad you brought it up because we're going to be talking about that again in a couple weeks. So you guys have something to look forward to now again as we keep teasing you with these topics that we're going to be talking about. Um, so make sure you turn in a couple weeks when we talk about that along with the Exodus. Did the Exodus happen? Did Moses Moses the author of the first 5 books of the Bible, and also did the crossing at the Red Sea happen? Mm-hmm. So those are 3 topics we're going to be talking about here in about a month's time or so. So you have that to look forward to. Just quickly here, I just want to touch on the 1 or 2 more of these topics. Prophetic evidence. So we have tons of prophecy biblically, and not all of it can point to the Bible being real. For an example, there are tons of prophecies about the Messiah in the Bible, which if you believe that Jesus is the Messiah or believe in the Messiah that was going to come, then those apply. But again, if you don't believe that the Bible is real, then those types of prophecies don't really add up to much. But there are some prophecies in the Bible that are more historical prophecies. That, and for an example, you find a couple of these in Daniel. So you have in Daniel chapter 2, I believe it's the entire chapter, where Nebuchadnezzar has this dream and nobody can decipher what it means. So he's basically going to execute all these people who are supposed to be able to tell him, what these dreams mean and all type of stuff. And Daniel comes along and says, "Hey, don't do that. I can interpret this dream for you." But he doesn't have Nebuchadnezzar tell him the dream. God reveals the dream that Nebuchadnezzar had to Daniel and then explains it to him. And in this dream, so he talks about this figure that's made up of 4 different materials. The head was made of gold. The arms, the torso were made of silver. The stomach and the legs were made of bronze, and then the feet and the lower legs were made of iron and clay.
Mm-hmm.
And so he goes in and explains to him like what these mean, and that Babylon was the head of gold, and they were a far superior society, and that. But there's going to be 3 groups that come after them that were inferior to Babylon, but they were going to rule for a time after Babylon, even though that they were going to be inferior. And so he lists them and explains them, and we have, we see that all of this comes to pass, that the Babylonians, get defeated by the Medes and Persians, and then the Medes and Persians get defeated by the Greeks, and the Greeks, get defeated by Rome. So we see this play out even long before Daniel. Daniel, says this long before any of this happens.
Mm-hmm.
And you'll get some people who will try to argue and say that, well, Daniel wasn't written till far later, when all this had already played out, and they try to explain, even though there's no evidence or very scant evidence to even begin to entertain that idea.
Yeah.
And then there's a second one later on in Daniel chapter 9, where Daniel chapter 11, in the first 4 verses, where he talks about the Greek Empire,
mm-hmm.
and Alexander the Great coming and expanding this empire, and basically said that there'll be 3 more kings after. He's talking to Cyrus at this point. He said that there'll be 3 more kings after you, and then the 4th one will wage war on Greece, and then coming in after that, there'll be a person who will expand the Greek Empire.
Yeah.
So, and we see that. You look at the Persian timeline. You have Cyrus, and then you have Cyrus's son, and then after you had his brother, and then after that there was Darius the Great, and then the 4th one is Xerxes, and we know that Xerxes attacked in a massive way, attacked the Greek Empire.
Mm-hmm.
So we see all this again, historical things play out that had been prophesied before they happened. So we see some prophetic evidence of the Bible being real. So
I have to make a correction for myself. It wasn't the Dead Sea Scrolls. The Dead Sea Scrolls, I think, were more or less referring to the New Testament.
There was some Old Testament in the Dead Sea Scrolls.
Yeah, but that wasn't
what some of the Dead Sea Scrolls
defined
go
the
back to
authorship.
BC.
Right.
Okay.
That wasn't what defined the authorship. It was through some historical accuracy. 19th century scholars evaluated some of the works from the 6th and the 5th centuries BC.
Mm-hmm.
So I wanted to make that correction.
Okay. Yeah, and the other one was some historical evidence, and we kind of already went into that
Mm-hmm.
Earlier. and just like I say, some of the authors like Luke is very specific. They give certain exact time frames in the 15th year of this person's
Yes.
rule in the fourth month.
Yeah.
And you can some of this you can trace back to the exact day that they were talking about. Um, so again, there's some more, and that lines up with other parts of history that is widely accepted. Like those timelines line up.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
So whether to say that the Bible is it's true in its um, salvation method that we have, uh, we cannot give you strict evidence, but we can say that there's a lack of proof to say that these things didn't exist. In fact, there is proof and evidence to say that the things in the Bible are historically accurate.
right.
So from then on, it's a faith thing.
Right. There, I would say yes. There's enough evidence to say that the Bible is real.
Mm-hmm.
To the extent you want to believe that, that's going to take some faith.
Yeah.
To which, again, I think God is never going to fully reveal everything because He wants us to have that faith. So we're never going to fully know and understand the whole thing, the whole picture. So, like I say, there is enough evidence to say it is real, and we've kind of gone through some of those reasons on why that is. If somebody comes up and says, "I don't believe the Bible's real at all," and it's just a bunch of fairy tales and all that stuff,
odds are they're probably not looking to hear what you have to say in the first place.
right? And now, just like I say, one, there's no point in arguing somebody if they're not going to listen. And two, if they're willing to listen, there are points that you can lay out and say, I can point you in a direction, but I believe everyone needs to find that journey on their own.
Mm-hmm.
If they're sincere in wanting to find those things out, they're going to, they can look into them and they can find those things out.
I think it's also important for us as learners to always be willing to listen to someone's viewpoint that differs from us and be willing to look up stuff later.
Mm-hmm.
So
I firmly agree.
My friend,
mm-hmm.
when he's bringing up things, he gave me a Quran that has been sitting on my bookshelf for too long. I've not touched it yet. When I get some time, I'm gonna go through it. But he brings up some points that I have to look at and I have to kind of contend with.
Mm-hmm.
And vice versa. He always tells me how he's like looking up stuff, researching things far more than I am, which is hilarious. But yeah, so in all, I think that what we've said, we've said a lot of things. Recommend going and doing your own research, looking at different points of view than what we've brought up, because there are several
right
that we haven't touched. Just a recommendation to really find the truth for yourself.
Right. And you got to remember that the enemy is always going to try to put things in your path to make you question whether the Bible's real. So that's why I say it's always important to make sure you're doing your research. You are looking in. You are seeking God in those things, that He will reveal that truth to you, because the devil's going to always put things that look on the surface like, ooh, well, that's going to make me question my faith.
That's another topic.
Until you get into and start looking into the biblical truth, and you see this a lot with Scripture, where I think things don't necessarily add up. But when you get into the Scripture and you look at the entirety of the Scripture, and it's when it was written, who was writing it, who they were writing it to, the whole context, then things start to make more sense, and you start to see that, okay, so there's not the same type of contradiction that on the surface it looks like there is.
Because you said it, I feel like I mean, I don't know if it was on the list of topics, but the existence of the devil.
That's another one.
That is one.
That is one.
All right, because I was
It's
just thinking about that. I'm like that could be fun.
yeah, that was a little further off.
Okay.
That was probably closer to Easter time in that time frame. So yeah, we have a whole list roughly planned out right now. But yeah, I think we got a good grasp on
Yeah.
today's topic. And yeah,
Speaking of topics, please comment. Let us know if there are things you want us to talk about. We'll probably do some research. Come in, Chris and I. For the most part, agree on the basics, but there are some details that we disagree on. So odds are what you bring up will be very interesting for us to discuss. So please comment.
exactly. And like I say, even though we have a schedule, it's a very fluid schedule, and we can always move things around, especially if you guys have a topic that you want to talk about. And say it's probably more important that we're talking about things that you guys want to listen to than it is talking about things that we've just come up with. We do that because we haven't heard from you to know what exactly the topics you want to hear about are. We hope that the topics that we do come up with are stuff that piques your interest and that you want to hear about. But we definitely want to talk about the things that you guys are wrestling around with that you don't necessarily fully understand and want to have us dive a little deeper in and talk about some more. So you can do that on all of our social media accounts. And if you are watching this on YouTube or the recording on Twitch, I'll put up our different social media accounts, so you can catch us on Twitch, like I say, live every Tuesday between 6 and 6:30, and as at twitch.tv at Wrestling with Our Faith. You can catch us on YouTube, and make sure you give us a like, a follow, and leave us a comment on YouTube to be entered in that opportunity to win a $50 Amazon gift card once we hit 50 subscribers. And you can see us on YouTube at Wrestling with Our Faith. We are on Instagram at Wrestling with Our Faith, on Twitter at WrestlingR, and we also have a Patreon account at you can just go up Wrestling with Our Faith, and we have some different ways that you can support our channel on Patreon. But hope everyone enjoyed our topic today. I know I did. It was a fun topic to research. Do we have anybody on Twitch? Any comments?
I think it's just us.
Just us, man. Josh's friend was there, and I think he left us.
I think he went to eat food.
That's a long time to eat. That was over an hour. It's like an hour and a half ago that he left.
It's a spiritual commitment. You gotta eat constantly.
Oh, okay. Apparently, yeah.
It's a good tradition.
So, but again, yeah, join us on Twitch to. We're always keeping an eye out on comments to have you join us in on the conversations each week. I say the more you guys that comment and join in on the conversation, the better that these conversations are going to be, and maybe we can stretch them out over a couple weeks if it's really engaging and really get into the deep nitty-gritty of some of this stuff that everyone's kind of wrestling with. So, all right. Hope everyone has a wonderful week. Hope you have a great week, Josh.
Thank you.
Anything going on this week?
No, I just want to say, for those of you who don't agree with this, too bad. But Merry Christmas. Doesn't matter if Thanksgiving's right around the corner. Merry Christmas. It's coming up.
That it is. I'll deal with it after Thanksgiving. I am a Christmas can start December 1st type of person.
Christmas started at Halloween.
I will say that I have a reasoning behind this.
Okay.
So I used to work for Pepsi for many years. So I was literally in stores having to listen to the same 7 Christmas songs from like November through December for years on end. And that kind of killed the Christmas spirit for me. You can only hear the same song over and over again so many times before it just is a buzzkill.
I disagree. I worked at Kmart for 2 years, and they don't have like the regular radio station. They have like the secondary cheap radio station.
Yeah.
Played the worst Christmas songs way too long, and I loved it. It was fantastic.
Yeah, but you can only hear Mariah Carey's "All I Want for Christmas Is You" 3 or 4 times in a day before it starts to get annoying.
Never,
Yes,
absolutely never.
absolutely yes. So
I fall asleep to that actually.
I'm sure you did,
Just play
but
it right now, like in July, I play it and I fall asleep to that.
well, God bless you, because that's never going to be me ever again.
We did have one comment from somebody.
Oh, we did have a comment from somebody.
They said Merry Christmas.
Did they really? I know who that person is. I'm pretty well. Let me say, I'm pretty sure I know who that person is, and that person is a little bit biased.
It's possible.
I think that person is quite biased towards you. So, yes, I'm saying that, and you can hear me right now. And I don't care. But look forward to seeing you guys next week. So we will let you guys know what we're going to talk about next week. We'll let you know the next 2 weeks because they kind of go together. So next week we are going to have the creation versus evolution discussion. So that should be interesting. It usually always is. Again, we're going to explore both sides of the argument because again, it's always important to know both sides of an argument to be able to know what you believe. You can never just look at something from one side and just say, this is what I believe, but I don't know what the other side is.
Right.
So we're going to have that argument, or let's say argument, discussion.
I'll fight you.
And then I'm sure you will. And then the following week, we're going to take creation part one step further. Excuse me. And we're going to have a discussion about a literal 6-day creation versus a non-literal 6-day creation, because there's 2 different sides and what people believe with that as well. So we're just going to have that discussion and lay out both sides of that. And I think that's just, it's more of one that I don't know if there's an exact answer for, but like I said, we'll lay it out and wrestle around with it and see where we end up at the end. So, all right, everyone, have a wonderful week. We look forward to seeing you next week. Peace out. I'm going to get this, don't worry.